Stasiland. Okay. Chapter 17 then. Drawing the line. Obviously a metaphor, not any literal description of actually drawing the physical line between East and West Germany, but also was that metaphor of where to draw the line in terms of the sort of moral line as well, I guess, and the how much anyone's prepared to take. And this is obviously clearly about Hagen Koch and the way in which he did you like that, Hagen Koch, how much he's prepared to take and where he draws the line. So it's a fairly profound and poignant chapter heading, and it leads the way for what is to come.
Chapter 17. Drawing the Line. So it was that I came on the 5th of April 1960 to the Ministry of State Security. Hagen Koch nearly swallows the words.
So, although this is direct speech, we've got the time marker there. Just, it's interesting that Funder has put that at the front of the paragraph, to emphasise whereabouts that it's happening and when it's happening, more importantly. And then we've got the metaphor nearly swallows the words. So got that typical use of figurative language to describe the way in which he says something, but obviously there's a discomfort there as well. So it's a fairly unpleasant image that she's creating there with nearly swallows the words. And that is something that repeats throughout this chapter.
4 days later, he says, this photo was taken. The photo shows a young man in his grey Stasi uniform, spruced and tense behind a huge lectern. Koch was giving his maiden speech, why I want to protect and defend my homeland. He took the oath. By order of the workers' and farmers' state, I promise, if necessary, to lay down my life, to protect against the enemy, obediently and everywhere. All the top brass were there. Milka was there. Afterwards, Koch stood in a loose group with his commandant. The other recruits were pretending to relax and trying to be noticed at the same time. Suddenly, Koch felt all eyes on him and a hand on his shoulder. He turned around. It was Milka.
Just before we push on here, there's the ellipses that are used above, I guess, works as sort of as a structural technique. It works a little bit like asyndetic listing, because you've got all the things he's prepared to do, or that he has to promise that he'll do: lay down his life, protect against the enemy, obediently and everywhere. And the ellipsis there acts in a way as a connective, just as you might find in polysyndeton or as a comma in an asyndetic list.
What is your training, young man? Technical draftsman. Milka addressed Koch's commandant. I want you to look after this one. His career. This is the kind we need. And so, Koch says, that is how I was lifted out from the great grey mass. He was immediately made director of the drafting office for cartographics and topography. I didn't have a clue, he tells me. My training was as a technical draftsman for machines. I knew nothing about maps. In the summer of 1960, shortly after joining the Stasi, Koch fell in love with a girl from Berlin.
Just that time marker there again. Just that there's a chronology even within this narrative, aside from Funder's narrative, which was obviously a flashback to Koch's own, should I say, Koch's own life. Sorry, I almost choked then. There's a chronology there within that own narrative.
Hadn't been in the Pioniere or the Free German Youth, and she certainly wasn't in the party, but she wasn't radical either. Koch smiles and sort of half winks. I chose my wife by her outside, not her political convictions. I find myself looking away, and the girly calendar catches my eye. It can't meet my gaze because its head is cut off. I look at its map of Tasmania in the forest. The Stasi knew everything. Koch's boss called him in and told him, that girl is inappropriate. We have plans for you, and that little one, she is GDR negative. For their part, her parents were horrified. He was one of them.
So that use of them is deixis, DEIXIS, and it's using a pronoun to replace a proper noun, and it's that sense of alienation. It's like calling something calling someone it. It sort of dehumanizes, and it's understandable because this is the Stasi, isn't it? This is that it is the enemy really for many people, and it becomes the enemy for him too, or in a fashion. So yeah, use of deixis there just to sort of distance themselves from from him and the Stasi.
As soon as she turned 18, they eloped. It was the 21st of July, 1961. Koch turns around and flicks a hand at the calendar. You noticed that, did you? He chuckles. Do you know what it is? What do you mean? I ask. That is the calendar for the border troops of the GDR, he said. Do you know what is special about it? No. That calendar was printed in mid-1990, after the wall came down. It was printed because even in that late stage, people here could not believe that the nation would simply cease to exist. Despite all the evidence, they thought the GDR would go on as an independent country, with an army and a border guard of its own, and that border guard would need its own girly calendar. When the wall was built in 1961, I thought it was something we had to do because they were robbing us blind, Koch says. The GDR was compelled to protect itself from the swindlers and parasites and black marketeers of the West.
I know this is direct speech, so it's not as easy to analyse Funder's style because it's not Funder speaking or writing. It's our man Koch. But we've got Polly Sinderton there with the swindlers and parasites and black marketeers of the West. So it's there for the taking. But a lot of this chapter actually is made up of dialogue, isn't it? So there's not a great deal of Funder. So there will be sections that I'll just let play. But there's enough bits to comment on. Although actually it does get to a point where there's nothing else I want to say. So I'll get to that point and I'll stop it so that there's no need to go any further with this chapter. But for now, there's a fair bit more to say on this page.
Because of subsidization, prices were lower in the East, but so were wages. Before there was a wall, he says, people thought, why should I work in the East when I could earn more in the West? So they went across to them each day and offered them their labour when we so badly needed it here to rebuild. And then, at the checkpoints on their way home, they'd change their West marks for Eastern ones at a rate of 5 to 1. Can you imagine? He says this as if rates of exchange were some kind of money voodoo. They'd come back here, able to buy up everything of ours. Not only that, but they'd buy up for their friends in the West as well. In the mornings we used to see these people on their way to work with rucksacks full of our bread, our butter, our milk, eggs and meat.
So again, it's direct speech, so less of Funder and more of Koch. But we've got the asyndetic list there of all the products: the bread, the butter, milk, eggs, meat, and the syntactic parallelism of our bread, our butter, our milk. So the sense that it's a real sense of possession there with that possessive pronoun our. And you could refer to it as anaphora if you wanted. It's the start of each little clause, or syntactic parallelism. Same thing really. Depends how you want to do it. What I would say in the coursework is that when you're writing about these things, you might want to mix it up a bit and use both phrases in separate points, so you're not overusing the same phrase like anaphora or syntactic parallelism. Use them a little bit interchangeably at times to sort of show more range in your own analysis.
Something had to be done to stop people fleeing through this mouse hole in the GDR. As well as leaving to work in the western sector each day, hundreds and later thousands of refugees started leaving the eastern sector for good. By 1961, about 2,000 people were leaving the east each day through West Berlin. Koch says his thinking was orthodox for the time. These people were shirking the hard work that had to be done here in order to build a better future for themselves. They wanted to enjoy their lives right here, right now. It was as if that were a moral failure, a religious falling off the branch. Who are these people who will reap where they have not sown? The GDR was hemorrhaging.
So we've met this sort of metaphor before, the sort of anatomical, medical type of hemorrhaging with this idea of disease and things. And now we've got this hemorrhaging, which obviously means losing blood, and so they're losing people. So it's a very apt metaphor, but just interesting that this is Funder, and she does like to draw on those very human, even down to anatomically human metaphors, and particularly where it involves bodily fluids. And we're going to find that, in fact, just over the page, we find that with her prophylactics. Well, not her prophylactics necessarily, but, anyway, we'll get to that. If you can hear me eating a biscuit, I'm sorry. When the thing's playing, I've got like what's called a noise gate on the microphone, so it's supposed to cut out any noise until I speak loudly into the microphone, or normal volume. But I'm not quite sure if I've set the threshold just right. So if you can hear me slurping tea and drinking and eating biscuits, then I do apologise. It's not meant to be an ASMR video, but if if it's 2 in 1, then whatever. Let's push on, shall we?
It wasn't just the ordinary workers who were leaving. It was the doctors, the engineers, the educated people. The GDR had paid for their education, and then they allowed themselves to be seduced by the lure of the West. So, according to Koch, Ulbricht, the head of state, decided he needed to build an anti-fascist protective measure.
Oh, brilliant. So we've got there the inverted commas there. It's a euphemism, an anti-fascist protective measure. It sounds bureaucratic, but it's a euphemism. They're going to build a wall, of course, and it's been worded and hedged in such a way that demonizes the West. Anti-fascist protective measure. And then, well, let the next line play and we'll talk about Anna Funder's prophylactics.
I've always been fond of this term, which has something of the prophylactic about it, protecting Easterners from the Western disease of shallow materialism.
So in fact, let me just play the next bit as well. Hang on.
It obeys all the logic of locking up free people to keep them safe from criminals.
That's a better point to stop. So prophylactic, we don't tend to use the phrase much now, but it meant birth protection, birth control, so essentially a condom, something to hold back, something to sort of prevent. And I just thought it was an interesting metaphor that she draws upon there. Again, it's very much in the semantic field of bodily fluids. You're welcome. And so, it's typical classic Funder. And then at the end of that paragraph, it obeys all the logic of locking up free people to keep them safe from criminals. It's obviously hyperbole, isn't it? It's ridiculous and nonsense, although it has logic to it. So it's hyperbole on Anna Funder's part because it's nonsense, and they wouldn't go that far. But there's some truth in that too. So there's a gentle, well, not that gentle, but a parodying there of the mindset of the Stasi. By using hyperbole, it often draws attention to the ridiculousness of things, and that's how parody works, isn't it? It sort of highlights the extremes of something to actually, well, put a spotlight on the actual things that happen, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
On the night of Sunday, the 12th of August, 1961.
So another time marker there. I'll just turn the volume down. Just another time marker, just to take us through the chronology of this particular narrative.
At daylight, people woke to find themselves cut off from relatives, from work, from school. Some made a dash through the wire. Others, who lived in apartments overlooking the borderline, started to jump from the windows into blankets held out by Westerners on the footpath below. Then the troops made residents brick up their own windows. They started with the lower floors, forcing people to jump from higher and higher windows. Koch was called to the garrison on the 13th of August, the day the wall went up. It was a state of emergency, and they were to stay on alert. 2 days later, I was called in to the commandant. He looked at my boots and pronounced them too shoddy for the mission. He ordered me to accompany a group, including Honecker, along where they had rolled out all the barbed wire, where the wall was starting to be. And he ordered me to get new boots. It was an ordinary summer day. When we got to where checkpoint Charlie was to be, there were crowds of protesters on the western side shouting at us. I had my left leg in the east, my right leg in the west, and I drew my white line across the street. I concentrated on the line and not on what was happening around me. I thought to myself that those in the west were enemies, looters, and profiteers. Koch then walked with Honecker and the others the length of the border through the city, nearly 50 kilometres. I'm surprised he doesn't have more to say about this day, which one might consider the beginning of his life's obsession. I was only 21 years old, he says. I just concentrated on my job of drawing the line. Then he adds, the next day I could hardly stand. You know how it is with new boots.
So a bit of bathos there at the end. Obviously, Funder is more concerned about the political ramifications and the social and emotional ramifications of what he's just done. He's literally been the man that drew the line down the middle, and yet his concern is about his feet and his new boots. So it's really bathos at the end. I mean, yes, it's him rather than her doing that. So it's Koch, doing that rather than Anna Funder. But she must stop saying Anna Funder. But she's the one that sequences this in this particular way. So I think she does it intentionally. I think she's arranged her paragraph here to leave it with that that bathos at the end, it seems to be something she tends to go towards, and it sort of represents the mindset of the Stasi and the sort of the mindset of him in particular, but it's sort of a bit of a synecdoche in a way. I mean, don't write that down necessarily because it isn't a synecdoche, but it represents something much bigger. That is the occupation or the preoccupation with small things rather than the bigger picture, and there does seem to be a fastidiousness with the Stasi and the way in which they obsess over small details without necessarily seeing the bigger picture and the impact that has on other people. So that's, nothing linguistic we can say about it, but it does, for me, seems to capture the tone of the Stasi in his small obsession with his boots rather than what he's actually doing, which is dividing a city and a country.
He leans forward. People ask me why I didn't cross the line when I was drawing it along the streets. Why didn't I just step over to the west and keep on walking? Because I was in love. I'd been married 3 weeks, so of course I went back to my young wife. It's only natural. Just like my father, he went back to his wife and I went back to mine. But his father went back to his family under threat of deportation to a POW camp. Koch didn't need to be threatened. Trained by his father, he had become socialist man. Koch says he's the only person alive who can represent, in his documents and photocopies and photographs, the wall from the eastern side.
The polysyndeton there of the documents and photocopies and photographs. Now that is Funder's words. That's not him necessarily, although it's reported speech. So it is. He possibly has said that it's reported, but it's not direct speech. But clearly, this is someone who has kept evidence, which again is that sort of synecdoche, isn't it, of the Stasi more widely, that they are a body that obsesses about keeping evidence on everyone and everything. And clearly it runs in his blood, if I can borrow Funder's own penchant for bodily fluids there for a second. It runs in his blood too, that he wants to store and keep evidence and things like that. So we've got that polysyndeton to show just the wealth of evidence that he's kept, because that's what he does.
Perhaps this is because most people on that side want to forget it. In fact, it seems now most people on both sides want to pretend it was never there. The wall has been erased so quickly that there is hardly a trace of it in the streets. Only a small part of the most colourful section remains, like a gaudy headstone.
So we've got the similarly there, like a gaudy headstone, but it's sort of bathos, isn't it? Because it's brought down again by the word headstone, which has connotations of death, of course. So you've got gaudy, bright, colourful, and then undermined by headstones. So there's bathos in there too, and there is humour, I think, in that as well as being quite profound, because, of course, it is the death of the wall. The wall has come down. It's the death of the GDR as well. All right, let's brace ourselves for another time marker, shall we?
In 1966, Heinz Koch traced his biological father, who lived in Holland. The grandfather came to the GDR on a day visa to meet his son. He came as an ordinary tourist. And because I was with the Stasi, Hagen says, my dad, aged 54, was thrown out of his job. Because he was a close relative to you, he was not allowed to have Westkontakte. Because I hadn't told them about the visit. The Stasi had to know everything about the extended families of everyone, but most particularly about their own. That was when my father first told me about his illegitimacy, about running for mayor, and about the threats to him if he didn't make me into a good socialist. I wondered what it would feel like to find out that you had been brought up by your parents as a paragon of a regime they did not believe in. Koch said to his father, Dad, if that's the way it is, I've had it. I want out. He thought, if my working here is a reason my father can't meet with his father, I don't want to be here anymore. I handed in my letter of resignation, he says. The same day he was arrested and put into a cell. Criminal charges were laid. They were preparation and reproduction of pornographic material. What?
Indeed. You've got the single word holophrastic interrogative there from Funder, and the sticker myth here of it being abrupt dialogue. And obviously that voices our own thoughts. It seems so random, doesn't it, what they're accusing him of? And it seems so absurd, which is typical of the Stasi. and it leads the way into what is this horrible manipulation of a family unit. So, I suppose the point I'm making, she didn't need to include that interrogative. She didn't need to give us that what. But the fact that it is a holophrastic sentence, the fact it is stickamithia, it just sort of stops us in our tracks as we read through this, and because we need to, because it's such an odd thing that happens, and even the wording of it as well. It's so bureaucratic. The preparation and reproduction of pornographic material is so bureaucratic, which symbolises the Stasi. Okay, that's that. Let's push on a bit further.
He enjoys my surprise and reaches once more into his box. He pulls out a stapled, handmade pamphlet. It has Romeo purple handwriting on it and cartoon pictures. Koch made a dozen copies of the booklet to celebrate a friend's wedding. In traditional German style, he sent up the groom, the bride, and the in-laws. It showed caricatures of them fully clothed with speech balloons, and was very far from being pornography. It was, however, illegal. In this country, any kind of printing was forbidden unless authorized. The Stasi had even developed a science of connecting individual typewriters to the print they made, as if to fingerprint thought.
Now that's another example of hyperbole, a little bit like we saw over the page with the... so I'll just turn the page back again. Apologies for my page turning. Oh yeah, the logic of locking up free people to keep them safe from criminals over the page, which was hyperbole. We've got that here. Fingerprinting thought is obviously hyperbole, but at the same time, it's a very profound, powerful point. And it's such an absurd and terrifying idea that you could fingerprint thought. It's making us view that in a different way. So she's using her figurative style that she has, and the sort of hyperbolic style that she has often, to make us think about things in a different way. That this is, they've linked the actual type of ink that the typewriters use, or the type of print that the typewriters create, to actually fingerprint. I mean, in reality, fingerprint the typewriters, but she's widening that to include thought. So it's sort of, I suppose, well, that's a sort of little synecdoche in a sense that the typewriter represents independent thought, which it does, of course, doesn't it? So there is a little synecdoche layer there operating as well.
Koch had used the machines at his office. They kept him in the cell for 2 nights and didn't tell his wife where he was. He was permitted no outside contact, no lawyer, no phone calls. Standard procedure.
So a minor sentence there, standard procedure, and it just shows the abruptness of the Stasi, and the sort of, we've seen it before, the abbreviations of things, very clipped, very abrupt, very bureaucratic, and that's what we have here with that minor sentence.
On the 3rd day, the Stasi and the DA searched his apartment for more pornographic material as evidence.
Now, I've just noticed there's no more notes in this chapter I want to say. It just sort of runs through the dialogue with him. I'll let this play out to the end of the chapter so you can read along with it, because I think it's useful to read, and I think it's be a shame to sort of cut it off there. But if you don't want to, then that's absolutely fine, but I'll at least give you the choice. So I won't say any more, but I'll leave this to run to the end of the chapter now.
They didn't find any. They questioned Mrs. Koch, who experienced a strange mixture of relief and focused terror. So that's where he is. They asked her. Koch's voice goes soft with distaste. They asked her about our sex life. They told her that if there was something wrong in that department, they would understand, and it might account for why your husband has taken up as a pornographer. No, no, she started to cry. She said there was nothing wrong. The DA said, well then, in that case, Frau Koch, I put it to you that your husband would only have prepared this pornography. What pornography? She was desperate. This pornography, he ignored her, at your instigation. The only sound was of the other man rifling through the apartment. It seems you have nothing to say, he went on. Let me ask you something. Is there anyone who could look after your little boy for the next 5 years or so? What? Why? Because I'm afraid, Frau Koch, that, as the instigator of a pornographic scheme, the penalties for you are severe. She started to cry. I don't understand. What do you want from us? What do you want from me? Don't take my child from me, please. Frau Koch, the DA said, the way I see it, The only chance for you would be if you credibly, and I mean credibly, distance yourself from your husband and what he has done. Only then would it be possible for me to recommend lenience to the judge in your case." "What do you mean? What is it you want me to do?" "It's quite simple," he said, opening his briefcase. "All you need to do is sign this application for divorce." I feel a mild physical shock. Koch says an application for divorce was put on the table and it was already filled out with each of their names in full, their dates of birth, identity numbers, and address. "She signed it," he says quietly. "She signed it out of fear they'd take the child away. Then they came to me in prison with this thing." He is disgusted again, even in the telling. "They said, 'Have a look at this here. It would appear your wife wants nothing more to do with you.'" Koch lowers his voice. At that moment, my world broke apart. 3 days later, my party secretary came to see me in the lockup. He was a man in his 50s with yellow hair and a red face. He said, "Koch, my friend, I haven't been able to sleep for 3 nights. For God's sake, what is going on here? You were always so punctual and reliable, so diligent and orderly. We've got to get you out of this mess." He walked up and down in the cell. "The thing is, if you leave, knowledge leaves with you. Operational knowledge goes with you. And knowledge must stay. Either you understand you have made an error in thinking by trying to resign, or you will be locked up for 4.5 years so that your knowledge stays here anyway." He spreads his hands in a gesture of sympathy. "You know, Koch, you've really only got one chance left. You have to take back your resignation, and as proof that you have understood the error in thinking you have made, you will renew your pledge to lifelong service." He put 2 documents on the table, already filled out. A retraction and another pledge. "Oh, and what's this I hear about your wife leaving you? Terrible! You know, it's times like these that we, the party, we will stick by you, comrade." "Did you believe your wife would leave you?" I asked Koch. "I had it in writing," he shouts. "I had it in writing." "Yes, but did you believe it?" "I had it in writing." This is a man who believes in documents. "Oh, and another thing," he says. "They said to me, 'When you've got rid of this wife, this negative influence, then you can probably be promoted.'" I was sitting in the prison. There was no one to talk it over with. So I said, "Can I go into the cultural division then?" And he said, "Yes." I wonder how it worked inside the Stasi. Who thought up these blackmail schemes? Did they send them up the line for approval? Did pieces of paper come back initialed and stamped approved, the ruining of a marriage, the destruction of a career, the imprisonment of a wife, the abandonment of a child? Did they circulate internal updates, 5 new and different ways to break a heart? When Koch came out of the lockup, he was deaf to everything but his distress. It clearly upsets him to be telling me. "I wanted nothing more to do with that woman," he says. "She thinks she can just leave me in the lurch like that and then come back and be my wife?" We were divorced. Our boy Frank was 5 and he went to live with her. I try to think myself into his place. I think what I would most want to hear would be an explanation from my beloved that it was all a terrible mistake. I ask him why he didn't ask. "Because I wouldn't hear it! I wouldn't hear it!" he shouts, imitating how he cut off his wife. "How dare you tell me to listen after what you've done?" But he did listen to his son. Months later, taking Frank for an ice cream, the story came out. Frank had been in the apartment and heard the officers threaten to take him away. Koch spoke with his ex-wife. A year after his imprisonment, and 6 months after their divorce, Mr. and Mrs. Koch remarried. The Stasi subjected him to disciplinary proceedings on account of inconstancy, and in their files attributed the remarriage to the repeated negative influence of Frau Koch.